The washing machine was already running. That is the first thing to understand about a 1950s housewife's Monday morning. Before the coffee finished brewing, before the children were fully dressed, before most of the neighborhood had opened a single curtain, the laundry was already in motion. The week had already started. She had already made her first decision. We tend to picture the 1950s housewife in soft, unhurried images. An apron, a smile, a kitchen that somehow stayed clean. What we picture less often is how calculated she actually was, how deliberate. How much of what looked like a peaceful home was really the result of a system she ran quietly, every single week before the morning got away from her. Monday was not a day she eased into. It was the day she set everything in order, and she did it in roughly 2 hours. If that sounds like a small thing, think about your own Monday mornings. The scramble for something clean to wear, the vague sense that the fridge needs attention, but there is no time to deal with it. The week starting before you have decided what the week is supposed to look like. That feeling, the one where you are already behind before you have properly begun, was not something she carried. She had figured out how to put it down before it had a chance to settle. If this is the kind of forgotten routine you want to understand properly, go ahead and subscribe. There is more where this comes from. She was probably awake before 7, not because she was extraordinary, but because the household ran on a schedule, and the schedule had logic behind it. Monday was laundry day in most American homes of that era, not because someone had decreed it, but because it made sense inside the rhythm of the week. The weekend had generated the dirty clothes. Sunday had been for rest and church and family. Monday was the natural place for the first heavy task, and she knew it before she even thought about it consciously. It was simply what Monday was. The laundry went in first because it ran by itself. That was the underlying intelligence of how she ordered her morning. A load of washing did not need her to stand over it. It needed her to start it. And then it could do its work while she did hers. Every minute that machine ran was a minute she got back somewhere else. She was not multitasking in the breathless modern sense of the word. She was sequencing, methodically ordering every step of her day. She was putting the slow work in motion so that the faster work could happen alongside it. The clothes that went in on Monday morning were the household linens and the work clothes, and whatever had piled up from the days before. She sorted them the night before in some households, or quickly on Sunday evening. Whites separate, colored separate, delicates set aside. There was no guessing on Monday morning. The pile was ready. The machine was waiting. She loaded it and moved on. This is worth pausing on because it tells you something about how she thought about time. She did not treat Monday morning as the moment to figure out what needed doing. She had already figured that out. Monday morning was execution. The thinking happened before, quietly, almost automatically, because the routine had taught her what to expect. She knew what a week produced in terms of laundry. She knew how long a load took. She knew what she would need clean by Wednesday and what could wait until Thursday's second wash. The whole thing lived in her head, not as a complicated plan, but as a simple, reliable rhythm. Did your mother or grandmother have a laundry day? A specific day, the same one every week, that was simply understood as the day the washing happened. If you grew up in a house like that, you probably remember it without thinking about it. The smell of the machine running, the particular busyness of that morning, the way the house felt slightly more purposeful than usual. That sense of purpose was not accidental. It was designed, even if nobody called it that. While the washing machine ran its first cycle, she was already in the kitchen. Not to clean it. Not yet. That came later, as part of a different rhythm. She was in the kitchen because the kitchen table was where the week got organized. And that work needed to happen before she left for any errands, before anyone called on the telephone, before the morning demanded something else of her. The kitchen table in a 1950s home was not just where the family ate. On Monday mornings, it became something closer to a desk. She would sit down, sometimes with coffee, sometimes without, and she would take stock. What was in the refrigerator from last week? What was low in the pantry? What the family had eaten over the weekend and what had been left untouched. She was not making a complicated assessment. She was doing something much simpler and much more useful. She was looking at what she actually had before she decided what she actually needed. That single habit, looking before planning, was what kept the grocery budget from running away from her. And it was what she did every Monday without fail, because what happened in the kitchen over the next 5 days would not plan itself. The refrigerator door opened slowly. She was not hungry, she was looking. This was the start of the second phase of her Monday morning, and it happened at the kitchen table with the same quiet focus she had brought to the laundry. The washing machine was still running in the background. She could hear it from where she sat. And that sound was almost like a metronome. The week was already in motion. Now she needed to make sure it had somewhere to go. What she was doing at that table would not have impressed anyone watching. There was no color-coded system, no printed planner, no app sending her notifications. There was a piece of paper, sometimes the back of an envelope, and her own knowledge of what her family ate, what things cost, what the pantry was holding, and what the week ahead was going to ask of her. She looked at what remained in the refrigerator first. Leftover meat from Sunday's dinner, half a block of cheese, some vegetables that needed using before they turned. Nothing got thrown away if she could help it. That was not a virtue she had to remind herself of. It was simply how she had been raised, and how the budget required her to live. The refrigerator told her what Monday and Tuesday's meals were already halfway decided. The Sunday roast became Monday's sandwiches or a quick hash. The vegetable that was starting to soften became Tuesday's soup. She did not think of this as creative cooking. She thought of it as finishing what she had already started. The week's meals grew forward from what the weekend had left behind, and she followed that logic without much drama. The pantry came next on her busy Monday morning routine. She knew it well, not because she had memorized an inventory, but because she was in it every day and paid attention. She could tell at a glance what was getting low. Flour, canned tomatoes, oats, dried beans. She was not shopping to fill a fantasy version of her refrigerator. She was shopping to fill the specific gap between what she had and what she needed. For the meals she had already half decided on, that gap was usually smaller than people imagine, because she kept the pantry stocked to a consistent level and only let it drift down so far before restocking. This is the part of her system that modern grocery shopping rarely resembles. Many people go to the store without a clear picture of what is already at home. They buy what looks good, or what is on sale, or what they imagine they might want to eat later in the week. She did not shop that way. She shopped from a list, and the list came from reality. From the open refrigerator, the visible pantry shelf, the meals she had already sketched out in her head. The list was written once. It was not revised in the car or added to at the store. It was finished before she left the house, and she trusted it. The shopping list was a single piece of paper, folded in half, tucked into her purse. It was organized loosely by where things were in the store: produce, dairy, dry goods, meat. Because she had walked those aisles enough times to know the order by instinct. She did not wander. She moved through the store with the list in her hand and came home with what was on it. The whole trip, when it happened, was efficient, not because she was in a hurry, but because the decision-making was already done. She had made every choice at the kitchen table, not in the aisle. The meals themselves followed a pattern she rarely had to think hard about. There were anchor meals, the dishes that appeared most weeks because her family liked them and she could make them without effort. A pot of soup, meatloaf, chicken with vegetables, eggs on Friday, depending on what was available and what had been used up earlier in the week. The anchor meals were the structure. What went inside them shifted depending on the refrigerator and the season and the budget. She also planned what we might now call a use-it-up dinner. Usually toward the end of the week, Thursday or Friday, when the refrigerator was getting spare. That meal was never written down as a recipe. It was whatever needed to be eaten before it was wasted, turned into something warm and filling and served without apology. Her family did not think of it as a leftover meal. They thought of it as dinner. The framing was different because the habit was built into the week from the start. Nothing arrived at Thursday by accident. It arrived there because she had planned backward from waste and forward from what she had. Does that kind of meal planning sound familiar to you? Not the elaborate Sunday prep version with matching containers and a laminated menu card, but the quieter version where someone in the house simply knew what was in the refrigerator and made sure none of it went to waste. The list was folded and set on the counter near her purse. That was the signal in her own mind that the meal planning was finished. not perfect. She was not aiming for perfect. She was aiming for decided. The week needed to eat, and she now knew how it would. The grocery run would happen later that morning or the next day, depending on what the schedule allowed, but the thinking was done. That part of Monday was closed. She stood up from the table and looked at the week in a different way now. The laundry was still running. The meals were sketched. Two of the biggest open questions the week had carried, what will we eat and what do we need from the store, were answered before most people had finished their second cup of coffee. What remained was quieter, but no less important. The week was not just meals and clean clothes. It was school days and appointments and the particular texture of what her family needed from her across the next 5 days. And that required one more kind of attention, the kind that did not go on paper at all, but lived in how she moved through the rest of the morning. The wall calendar was not decorative. In most 1950s homes, it hung in the kitchen or just inside a doorway. Somewhere visible, somewhere that got looked at naturally in the course of the day. It was not elaborate. It did not have color-coded stickers or weekly themes, or inspirational quotes printed across the top. It had squares, and inside the squares were the things that were actually happening. A dentist appointment, a school concert. The day the electric bill was due, the afternoon a neighbor was expected to stop by. It was a plain record of a real week, and she checked it every Monday morning, as part of the same quiet sequence she had already been running since before 7. She did not need a long time with it, a minute, maybe 2. She was not discovering the week's contents. She already knew most of them. She was confirming, making sure nothing had been forgotten in the back of her mind, and making sure that whatever the calendar showed had already been accounted for in the morning's other decisions. If Wednesday had a school event, she noted that when planning meals, something easy that evening, nothing that required long preparation. If Thursday had a visitor expected, she filed that in the part of her mind that tracked which rooms needed attention and when. The calendar and the kitchen table worked together, even if she never would have described it that way. Everything she did in those 2 hours was connected. That is what made the system work as a system rather than a collection of separate chores. Nothing happened in isolation. The laundry decision informed the ironing schedule. The meal plan informed the grocery list. The calendar informed the meal plan. She was running a small, quiet operation, and she understood how the pieces fit together, even if she had never sat down to explain it to anyone. Ironing was part of this phase too, not the act of ironing itself, but the planning of it. She knew which items coming out of Monday's wash would need to be pressed before they were worn, and she knew when they would be needed. A school dress for Wednesday, her husband's work shirt for Tuesday morning, her own blouse for a Thursday visit. The ironing would happen later. Tuesday was often ironing day, or sometimes Monday afternoon once the wash had dried. But the sequence was already mapped. She did not wait until Tuesday morning to realize she had forgotten to iron something needed by 8 o'clock. She thought about it on Monday so that Tuesday could run without surprises. Mending worked the same way. If something came out of the laundry with a loose button or a small tear at the hem, it did not go back into the drawer in that condition. It went into the mending basket, a real physical basket that lived in a consistent spot, and it waited there until she had a quiet moment to fix it. The mending basket was not a place where things went to be forgotten. It was a place where things waited in an orderly way until they could be dealt with. The difference between those two things is the difference between a system and a pile. She always knew what was in it, roughly how long each repair would take, and whether anything in it was needed urgently before it could wait. She also thought about what the children would need across the week. Not in an anxious way. She was not running through worst-case scenarios or writing long lists of contingencies. She was thinking practically and briefly. Does anyone need something clean that is not yet washed? Is there a permission slip that needs signing? Is there anything that needs to leave the house on a specific morning that might be forgotten if it is not set aside now? Small questions, answered quickly, handled before they became problems. The children probably never knew she had thought about any of it. That was the point. Did your grandmother or mother have a day like this? A morning where you could feel the house shifting into a different gear? Even if you were too young to understand exactly what was happening? where someone seemed to be quietly running the numbers on the whole week while you ate your breakfast. If you grew up in that kind of house, you may have felt the result of it more than you saw the work itself. The school uniform that was always ready, the dinner that appeared on time, even on a complicated day. The sense that the house had a kind of logic to it, a steadiness that held even when things got difficult. That steadiness did not come from luck or from having more money or from living in simpler times. It came from Monday morning. It came from 2 hours of quiet, unglamorous planning that most people never saw and rarely thought to ask about. The invisible labor of that era is something historians and writers have spent considerable time examining, and rightly so. The work was real, it was uncompensated, and it was relentless in ways that carried their own weight and difficulty. None of that is being set aside here. What is worth looking at closely, though, is not whether the arrangement was fair, it often was not, but whether the system itself had intelligence in it. Whether the habits carried something useful that got lost when the habits disappeared. The answer, looked at plainly, is yes. The weekly mental map she carried was not a burden she had invented for herself. It was a skill she had been taught, usually by watching her own mother do it, and her mother before that. It passed from woman to woman in kitchens and laundry rooms across generations. And what it produced was not just a clean house, or a warm dinner, but something harder to name. A household that felt held together. A week that did not spin out of control on Wednesday because something basic had been forgotten on Monday. She was not superhuman. She did not love every minute of it. She had days when the system felt like too much, and the week pressed in from every direction. But the system existed whether she felt like running it or not, and that was its real value. A routine does not ask how you are feeling, it just runs. And on the mornings when she was tired or distracted or carrying something heavy, the routine carried the week forward anyway because she had built it to do exactly that. The laundry was nearly done with its first cycle now. The kitchen table was clear. The calendar had been checked. The ironing was mentally scheduled. The children's needs for the week had been quietly filed away. She had been moving through the house for not much more than an hour and a half. And almost everything that could go wrong with a week had already been prevented. There was one thing left to do before the morning fully opened, and it was the smallest thing of all. But it was the one she never skipped. The counter was wiped down, the chairs were pushed in. That was how she ended it. Not with a flourish, not with a sense of triumph, but with 2 small physical acts that told her body and her mind that the setup block was finished. The kitchen was not being cleaned in any deep sense. That came later in the week, on its own scheduled day. This was something smaller and more deliberate. She was closing the morning the same way she had opened it, with a clear, intentional action that meant something specific within the rhythm of her day. She made a cup of tea, or poured the last of the coffee, and she sat for a few minutes before the house fully demanded her. This was not laziness, it was the opposite of laziness. It was the moment she had earned by starting early and moving efficiently. And she took it without guilt because she understood something that often gets lost in modern conversations about productivity and rest. The pause at the end of focused work is not wasted time. It is the thing that makes the next stretch of work possible. She had grown up watching women who understood this, and she had absorbed it without anyone having to explain it in those terms. The washing machine had finished or was close to finishing. She would hang the laundry before the morning was fully gone, outside on the line if the weather allowed, which in her mind it usually needed to unless it clearly did not. The line-dried sheets and shirts would be ready by afternoon, stiff and faintly sun-warmed, and they would go directly into the ironing pile or onto shelves depending on what they were. That too had been planned. She was not going to come back to a pile of damp laundry and wonder what to do with it. The next step was already known. The house by 10 o'clock on a Monday morning looked a particular way in her home. Not spotless, that was not the goal, and she was realistic enough not to chase it on a weekday morning. But ordered, purposeful. The kitchen table was clear because it had served its function and been cleared. The laundry was either running or hanging. The shopping list was in her purse. The week's meals existed, at least in outline, in her head. There was food in the refrigerator that she knew how to use before it turned. There was nothing urgent and forgotten lurking somewhere in the back of her mind. waiting to ambush a Tuesday or ruin a Wednesday. That feeling, the absence of ambient dread about the week, is harder to manufacture than it sounds. Many people spend Sunday evenings trying to produce it with planners and podcasts and elaborate meal prep sessions that take all afternoon and leave the kitchen a wreck. She produced it on Monday morning, in 2 hours, with a piece of paper and the habits she had been running for years. The difference was not intelligence or energy or having fewer responsibilities. The difference was structure and the willingness to treat Monday morning as the week's foundation rather than just its reluctant beginning. She was not doing this to impress anyone. Nobody was watching. No one was going to comment on the folded shopping list or the mental ironing schedule, or the way she had looked at the refrigerator before she planned the meals. These were private systems, invisible ones, and they ran because she ran them. Because somewhere along the way she had decided, or been taught, that a week left to chance was harder to live than a week that had been given a shape. What would change for you if you gave Monday morning 2 hours on purpose? Not to be productive in the way that word gets used now, not to optimize or hustle or get ahead of your competitors, but simply to set the week in motion before it sets itself in motion without you. To know what is in the refrigerator, to write the list before you go to the store, to check what is coming and make sure the things that need to be ready will be ready. To start the slow work first so it runs in the background while you do everything else. These are not complicated ideas. That is the thing that tends to surprise people when they look closely at how she operated. The system was not clever in any technical sense. It was not innovative. It was not the product of exceptional organization or unusual intelligence. It was the product of doing the same reasonable things in the same reasonable order every single Monday until the order became effortless, and the week became manageable almost automatically. The system worked because it was consistent, not because it was brilliant. And somewhere along the way, that consistency stopped being passed down. The habits scattered. The laundry day disappeared into a vague idea that laundry happens whenever. The meal plan gave way to the question asked at 5 in the afternoon, "What do you want for dinner?" With nothing prepared and nothing decided, the shopping list became the phone held open in the supermarket aisle, while you try to remember whether you have pasta at home. The wall calendar became an app that buzzes at you an hour before everything, because nobody planned far enough ahead to give the week any shape. She was not behind her time. She was not limited by it. She had a skill, a practical, learnable, repeatable skill, that produced a calmer, more ordered week than most modern systems manage to deliver. The skill was built from small things, starting the slow work first, looking before planning, writing the list before leaving, closing the morning with intention. None of it was magic. All of it was method. The washing machine running before 7, the refrigerator door opened with purpose. The folded list on the counter, the wiped-down surface, and the pushed-in chairs. The cup of tea taken without apology before the day fully began. That was the 2 hours. That was how the week was set. Not perfectly, and not without effort, but with a steadiness that held through Wednesday and Thursday. And right up to the weekend when the clothes were clean and the meals had been eaten. And almost nothing had been wasted, and the week had not, somehow, gotten away from her. The routine can be rebuilt. It begins on a Monday morning before the house wakes up, when you decide to start the slow work first. If this kind of forgotten wisdom is what you come here for, subscribe. There is always another drawer to open, and another old habit worth understanding.